through the second point that I want to make, and I'm going to essay into the precise question that you raised. On every single occasion, in every single circumstance, wherever you are in the world, whatever time in history you are, the fact is this, that men and women make history, but only to the extent that the circumstances of history permit them to make. They do not make this history and circumstances chosen by themselves, but circumstances which are inherited from the past. And what have arisen in the extant conditions. And part of what has arisen from the past, which has inherited, and what occurs in the present, are ideas in the heads of men and women. And sometimes the ideas from the past may be like a nightmare on the brain of the living. No. We are where we are, close to the United States of America. Almost every discussion which takes place in the Caribbean and Latin America takes place in the shadow or the presence of the United States. I can't lift up St. Vincent and the Grenadines anywhere that often can lift up Guyana, or Gaston can lift up Antigua and Barbuda, and carry to Vladivostok or the mouth of the Amur River. We are where we are, carrying with us the benefits and the burdens of being close neighbors to the most powerful military and economic nation that the world has ever seen. Large countries, however, have securities as well as phenomenal insecurities. This sometimes comes as a shock to people. Sometimes it is amazing what could make them feel insecure. Whether you're dealing with the United States of America, you're dealing with Russia, you're dealing with China. No. The United States of America parades a lot of military hardware in the seas near to Venezuela. The fact of the matter is this: what it says publicly cannot be what it means. It says publicly that this is to address drug trafficking. Well, if you're going to address drug trafficking, the drugs that go to the United States, 90% of the drugs go on the Pacific side of South America, Latin America. A very small proportion come on, relatively speaking, on the Caribbean side. So if you're going to deal with this, logically you deal with it there. But secondly, if you're going to deal with it on the Caribbean side, and we work with the Americans all the time in dealing with drug trafficking and trafficking in persons, you don't do it with a nuclear-powered submarine. So that there must be another reason why this is so. I would think that most persons may come to a conclusion as to why this parade is taking place. But it is most important for the Venezuelans to come to the conclusion as to why they're doing this. Because why Venezuela will be concerned about it directly. And this is a matter of great seriousness. Our government issued a statement condemning it, saying that it violates the principles, so too CELAC of the Caribbean and Latin America's zone of peace. Having made that point, however, how do we address this? Do we address this with an instinctive, bellicose approach? Or do we address this with a patience and a calm and seeking to see how we can interface with the Americans in a mature manner to see whether we can have a conversation that we don't have a repeat of this and to have a respect for the Caribbean as a zone of peace. Of course, if decisions are made already beyond what I'm talking about in respect of regime change in Venezuela, well, that isn't a matter of immediate concern to the Venezuelans. And of course, secondary so to us, very much a concern to often. The government of Guyana is bounded next to Venezuela. And it's a concern to me and Grenada, because if you have war, not only good people run, especially bad people run out. And they run out for opportunities. And then there you have Curacao and Aruba, just above Venezuela. That's part of Europe. Those are colonies of Holland. And then not too far away is St. Martin, which is French, which is an associate territory, associate member of the CARICOM. So the matter becomes more and more complicated. Meaning that we have to talk, and we can only talk together. If anybody goes as one, you're not going to make the impact. And I just want to add one further point. It's this. Most conflicts in the world which have come out in open warfare. In fact, I hardly think of any conflict where you have had war, which has not come to an end by talking. Well, if wars come to an end by talking, why not try and let us talk before the war happens in order to be able to have some understanding? Of course, if there are agendas larger than what I'm talking about, but then that's an issue which we will reach a point of almost no return. We haven't reached there yet. So we in CARICOM have to look maturely as to how we address this disruption of the zone of peace. The last thing that Guyana needs, and I can't talk to Guyana if I don't talk to Guyana, is to have a conflagration on the doorstep. They're interested in peace. They have their difficulties with Venezuela, but that's an issue, from where I look at it, of a lesser order, that if you're going to have a regime change, because different sets of circumstances arise with different ruptures. So this matter which you raised, I must tell you this. In my 25 years, almost as Prime Minister, this is the matter which has given me the greatest concern and a matter of great urgency and dedication.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Mentioning CARICOM, this is for President Ali. Is it time to build a stronger Caribbean security and defense mechanism and what role should CARICOM play? You have mentioned in the past that CARICOM should serve as, quote, a collective shield and moral compass for Caribbean nations. So please tell us what role CARICOM can play in this matter.
That's a very loaded question. As to whether we
That's
should,
why we're here.
as to whether we should build a defense shield. We have a defense shield. And our defense shield in this region has always been our philosophy and our values. Our greatest defense shield is our value system. And our value system teaches us that humanity must live in peace, and we must do every single thing to keep humanity in peace. To invest in any other form of shield will be very costly for us. Because, as I said, we're small in population, but the space we occupy is extraordinary. But it is not necessarily true that shields necessarily protect you, as we saw recently in the case of Qatar, with massive investment in the air defense system. And it was penetrated somehow.
Over and not only does it penetrate it, but is interested in modern warfare. Other than the missiles going into the territory of Qatar, not one Israeli soldier was there. They fired it from across the Red Sea. And bomb blazes.
So, as common
I just intervened with that. To strengthen the point you're making.
yes. The region is not interventionist. So don't take that as an example. So I would, now let me say this. It is very important for us as a region to also have a very open and frank conversation on a number of matters. And I believe that this is the opportune time for us to have this open and frank conversation. And I said this in my United Nations address recently. How can we move the issue of Cuba forward? How can we define a path that would lead to the prosperity of the people, whilst at the same time addressing the challenge and the issue of the embargo, which must be addressed, and Cuba listed as a state sponsor of terrorism? Similarly, what we see in the military buildup is what we see. But what is it that we may not be seeing is a very important question. And this is where the intelligence sharing and the trust among countries and among our allies and partners become important. We have to be able to understand whether there is a larger play or there is a larger challenge or issue in the region that we are not aware of, but exists. And we cannot ignore the fact that for a very long time, there are other countries with nuclear capabilities that has been trying to make their presence known in the region. And this might be a very uncomfortable conversation, but it is part of the open dialogue that we must have. For many times we have heard that Hezbollah has established some form of footprint in the region. We have heard that Iran has established some footprint. Are we ready to have this closed but open debate among ourselves with a shared intelligence so we can address all of the issues on the table? So that we as a region can have a full understanding as to the whole of the complexity and not only what we are seeing. Because as Prime Minister Ralph has mentioned, there must be more to the equation. But the only way we as leaders can fully define what is the more is if the information that is available is shared, analyzed, understood, and form part of the conversation. And that for me is very important to avoid what can be a sad day. Now, I can speak, for example, for Guyana. And I would call Prime Minister Ralph, I would call Prime Minister Mia, I would call Gaston from time to time. And why would I call? We have had major challenges. We have had challenge with armed gangs from Venezuela shooting across the border to our military. And I've made this known. We have had increase of overflights, drug overflights across our airspace. These are facts. But the only way we can define a trusted strategy is if we do exactly what Prime Minister Ralph has suggested. We're not saying here today that this is right, this is wrong, who is on the right side. All we're saying is that let us have this conversation. Let us understand what is happening. Let us understand the whole of the equation so that everyone can sing from the same hymn sheet. Because if there is a greater threat that the intelligence service might be picking up, then it is fair, it is only fair for us that we are made aware of the threat. We have seen what the movement of weapons has done to our countries. We have seen small island states of the region having persons who are connected to international terrorist network. Now imagine what those networks do within our countries if they're able to create a large enough set. And then what can it do to the entire region? So my belief on this matter is that we know for sure one thing. All of us want this region to remain in a zone of peace. But we are not sure that we have before us all of the information and intelligence that is available and that should be available for leaders within the region. And I will leave it there at this moment.
Thank you so much.
May I say something additional to what Governor said? And to welcome me. I know she had the reparations discussion going on. And we are very happy that she was able to make it from there to here. In 2023, when they appeared as though there was going to be an outbreak of hostilities between Guyana and Venezuela, I was president pro tempore of CILAC. And working with Guyana and Venezuela, and with Mia, other colleagues in CARICOM, and with Lula in Brazil, we were able, our chairman then was Bruce and Skerritt in CARICOM. We were able to summon a meeting of Guyana and Venezuela, CILAC and CARICOM, at Argyle in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And we produced an agreement, the Argyle Declaration. The Argyle Declaration is not meant to solve the problem between Venezuela and Guyana. It was intended to preserve the peace. And it has done that. And we have been successful. When Guyana does something which Venezuela thinks is out of order and vice versa, I will either get calls from Irfan or Maduro or Nicholas, or I'll get letters. And when they send a letter to me, if Irfan sends a letter to me, I send it to Nicholas. Nicholas writes, I send it to Irfan. So that as an intermediary, if there's a lover's quarrel, I don't mind being in between them, trying to see if I could help to make sure the lovers don't fight one another. The neighbors don't fight one another. And this is what we have to do and build the trust as we're going along. It's not easy, but none of these things is easy. The only places where these are easy is when a guy writes an editorial or writes a column in a newspaper, because they can change their mind tomorrow. They can go back to something they say the week before the last, say something else. Their opinions don't have real consequences. But Ovan's opinion, stated publicly, has a consequence. Nicholas' own has consequence. Mine would have consequence. But we have to build a state with institutions called trust. It's not easy. And if I know that, in as much, I don't want this discussion just to be on this question, but in as much as this matter has been raised, I know there is an important official from the Venezuelan government here, and I'm sure that this conversation will be relayed to the government of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, so that we can all work together to see if we can have the region maintained as a zone of peace.
Thank you so much. Hello. Sorry about all the technical difficulties. Prime Minister Motley, thank you for joining us. We're so delighted to have you here. Having a conversation about Caribbean integration, of course. You've been a global leader on actions to combat climate change, and your Bridgetown initiative calls for more regional cooperation, emphasizing that the collective voice of the Caribbean community is more powerful in pushing for financial reform than any single member. You've also pointed out the perils of disintegrating partnerships such as the EU and Brexit. Can you please elaborate here and share your vision of Caribbean integration, Madam Prime Minister?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First of all, let me apologize for the late arrival. I think Ralph would have indicated that I had a previous commitment, and I thought we had bad traffic at home until I got to New York. But I took solace in the fact that the traffic affects all, from presidents to pauper. I want to, at the outset, salute Ralph for yet another book that adds to the value of our civilization and our integration movement, and allows others both to better understand and appreciate what we are doing and why we are doing it. You asked me a question related to why I believe the integration movement is necessary, and I suspect you are taking the quote of Brexit from my last speech at the Government meeting in Jamaica, when I warned us that we should not follow Brexit. I'm not even sure that CARICOM as a integration movement is going to be large enough to withstand the winds that will come if we do not have a rules-based system globally. And the reality is that if you look at our integration movement, It is one of a community of sovereign states premised on functional cooperation, and opportunities in the economy, coordination of social policy, and ironically, I realized much of the last 15, 20 minutes was spent on the issue of security and peace. And I had the good honor of helping the region build out the infrastructure for security. Ironically, it was for Cricket World Cup of 2007, but we determined that it needed to benefit the people of the region in perpetuity. And if we just start there, you begin to understand why the immigration movement is absolutely essential. Much of what we do to protect our security cannot be afforded on our own, particularly by the smaller states in the region. Whether it is with respect to the regional security system of which Guyana has become its last member, and which previously is the OECS and Barbados, and I make a strong case for Trinidad and Tobago and Suriname to consider joining it, because the reality is that none of us have the ability to do what we need to do on our own. Whether it is with respect to the single market, similarly, our population sizes and our market sizes are simply too small, and therefore do not admit of us being able to benefit from appropriate economic growth, because the markets are simply too small. Whether it is in the coordination of foreign policy, which I suspect former Prime Minister Douglas, Minister of Foreign Affairs, it's a news I believe is responsible for cheering off for now. And the reality is that that has always been and will always be the most difficult part of the exercise of the regional integration movement, because of the variation in beliefs and positions and sometimes even ideology. But when we start to look at what is being done globally, in terms of the possibility of the carving out of the world in the backyards, you begin to understand that seriously, you cannot withstand a lot of what will happen on your own. When we start to better appreciate, and Ralph, you and I discussed this on the 23rd of August in Barbados, at the beginning of Carfest in the big conversation, that our greatest threat is in fact now the lack of sovereignty over information and the movement of information and the storage of information and data, and that this quite probably will constitute the new armada and the new assaults on our sovereignty. Then we understand why we must be together. And I go further. I do not believe that we should allow the convenience of who colonized us and therefore who gave us language to continue to separate us at a time when we face common problems in this region and more than ever need each other. And the ball reality with climate and the climate crisis is that we together are all exposed, although the good fortune perhaps is that it is unlikely that every island in the region will ever be hit all at once in the same season. And therefore it is in the expression of solidarity that we continue to face the annual hurricane season and the possibility of coming together, conscious that today for me, tomorrow for you, and the simple premise of the revised Treaty of Shagaramas, which is captured at law in the most favored nation principle, is reflected in the hearts by a simple outreach of support and love for each other when something happens in the region. You don't have to tell our people that it is their duty to send things to a country that is affected. There's an immediate outpouring of support. And that is largely because what they feel is what we are trying to achieve. They feel the kinship and the bonds with each other, and they recognize that we cannot do this alone. And therefore, I want to urge, because the only thing Brexit has done is to bring great divisiveness and remove opportunity from the people of Britain with respect to the European Union project. I do not believe, however bad things get, however much we may not share the same opinion on the same day, that it is in our interest to allow elements of the integration movement to be disintegrated, to be effective. And that is why, Ralph, I really want to salute you. Both you and Roosevelt and Denzel as well represent the continuity and the capacity to tell the story and to guide. There are aspects of our integration movement that are archaic, and there are aspects that need modernization. In my view, there is an urgent need for a political arm, particularly in today's world, where there is ongoing political engagement globally. And in fairness to the Secretariat, I do not believe that asking the Secretary General to walk both parts is an ideal situation. Europe has a political arm. It does not stop France from having its own foreign policy, or Spain, or Portugal. And I genuinely believe, especially after we went through Ralph and Irfan, the reality of moving, of the attempts to move Nicholas for Guaido. And it was the Caribbean, St. Kitts, the previous government, the Gaston, you recall, it was the Caribbean who stood up and did the legwork here at the UN, and then in Latin America, with Uruguay, with Mexico, to be able to make the point that we needed to respect the Charter of the United Nations and what was going on there. So we have a role to play. But that role will best be played to work together. It will be ignored if we try it individually and separately. And quite frankly, I think a time will come, not just for the political arm in the form of being able to conduct foreign policy and international trade discussions outside of the region, and where international security discussions, as put some things on the table which are so relevant for us to be part of the dialogue, because we are on the front line of any possibility of any unfortunate events. As it relates to the ultimate expression of political integration, that will only happen when political parties start to talk with one another. And in the absence of that discussion among political parties, it cannot therefore be on the immediate horizon. But I suspect that if we do not save this international rules-based order, then my friends, that which we may never have contemplated will be imposed upon us, because it is going to be difficult not just for small states to survive, but developing countries that have limited options and limited powers to survive in a world where people feel that backyard dominance is to be the order of the day through exercising power, rather than through the protection of rules that will allow sovereign nations to survive and thrive. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There's going to be 3 segments tonight, so that concludes the first segment, and now I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Dr. Atiba Reza, who will moderate the next segment with our esteemed panelists. Dr. Atiba, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'd like to invite Mr. Brown and Drew to join us. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me now?
Before we proceed, I'd like to thank Ambassador King for having received the thank this event. And thank my new colleague, Nance Boone, for his program to questions on the discussion of the topic Drought vexing has progressed significantly in the has been made. Without further ado, we proceed the discussion of Dr. Sarasco. Our Caribbean. Coming outside. Our Caribbean. Why not just the Caribbean? Why the emphasis on our Caribbean?
Musimati, the great Cuban patriot, used to talk about the Caribbean and Latin America, our America. I speak of the Caribbean, our Caribbean. Because the Caribbean has a distinctive island and seaboard civilization of a uniqueness. Look at all civilizations all over the world. It doesn't have all the elements what we see in the Caribbean of this seaboard and island civilization. This civilization has an authenticity, a legitimacy. It is of its own special kind. And to have a civilization, we need to have energy and will and a certain permanence in the seascape and landscape of this thing what we call our Caribbean civilization. So that when I say our, we possess it as our own. And we find ourselves with nation states independently, but we are a Caribbean civilization. And what we are seeking to do is to provide institutional expressions to this civilization, and that those institutional expressions take different forms. And in fact, to link this Atiba, what Mia was talking about earlier, we may well find in the reform of CARICOM, in the evolution of the integration movement. Do not be surprised that we have an even more enhanced geometry, variable geometry of integration. That is to say, we have the OECS at the moment, it's the tighter form of integration. We have CARICOM, but don't be surprised that in other areas, you may have other kinds of integration. In the Northern Caribbean, you may see another kind of integration in our Caribbean. While CARICOM exists, something which may involve Jamaica, may involve Dominican Republic, may involve Haiti in some special kind of a way, and perhaps when times change in relation to Cuba, I'm not talking regime change, talking when times change, and also when times change too in Puerto Rico, the possibilities of the variable geometry of integration have not yet been fully exhausted. And I think that is part of where Mia was going when she's talking about the integration movement hasn't yet, that some forms of it may well be uploaded, and some forms which we have to alter and enlarge, make different. So you asked me about our Caribbean civilization. To me, it's not just the Caribbean civilization. It belongs to me. Guyana belongs to me. Trinidad and Tobago belong to me. Barbados belongs to me. And St. Vincent and the Grenadines belong to them. Unless we think in those terms and in these terms, we ain't going to survive and thrive in this world. Let me just make one point which is often missing. I want everyone, despite all our challenges and all the problems we have, matters will be far worse if we didn't have the integration mechanisms that we have. And if you want to see how this region, with all these challenges, how well we are performing with human development, look at the last report of the United Nations Development Program. They have 4 categories of human development: very high, high, medium, and low. There's no country in the Caribbean which is in category low. One in CARICOM, medium, that's Haiti, despite all its problems. And there are 5 countries in CARICOM in the very high category of human development. St. Vincent and the Grenadines, beset by all the storms and volcanic eruptions and all the rest of it, we are in the top tier of the very high level of human development. So this Caribbean, what we have done with what limited resources we have, and the way we have interfaced with the world together, and also bilaterally, is utterly amazing. And Mia addresses an issue about how people respond instinctively at Eva. We have within our Caribbean, our civilization, a genius in our people. And the older I get, the more I realize this genius. There are hidden rationalities in us. There are submerged resources and impulses which come from hiding, come above ground, come out of the waters. And when they are made manifest, we are all absolutely amazed. And part of the requisites of our leadership is that we have to be able to draw out of people those hidden rationalities, those submerged resources to make our Caribbean civilization better. So we ask to find our, we simply that who you are belongs to us, it doesn't belong to other people. And by the way, when I say our Caribbean civilization, I mean also our diaspora, even though they are not resident at the moment within our geographic landscape and seascape, they continue to belong to us. And that linkage of our civilization at home and that abroad, the possibilities have not yet been fully exhausted there.
Thank you. In the preface demonstrated in our games that the Caribbean people have before them an opportunity to fashion an institutional expression of regional integration that affords with a shared expression and sense of existential belonging. This magnificent landscape. Please elaborate exactly what you mean.
Well, I kind of anticipated that, and I provided some explanation for it. The these shared experiences, and I want to reiterate it. Shared experiences are important. They're one thing, but for those shared experiences to deliver optimally, those shared experiences must be made manifest in shared expressions institutionally. And that is critical for the further development of our Caribbean society. In all Caribbean.
Starting by speaking about the sale of passports, and I know that's become a vexing issue in some places. We were at a time when we were told that some people aren't worthy of citizenship in certain places. Why did you begin with that? And why is that really important?
But let me say this. There, a number of countries in CARICOM have they involved in the citizenship and investment programs. It is supported. Barbados doesn't support it. Guyana does not support it. So there's a difference of unit. And that's fine. We don't have to agree on everything. In accordance with our individual, how we perceive our own individual requisites for our own individual nations. What, however, I was addressing is the way in which, in the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and I have to lay out the backdrop, that right now as I speak, I want everybody to hear me in this. There are companies which are involved in the issue, are interested in selling the passport of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and selling our citizenship, who are actively engaged in the politics in my country, seeking to subvert our competitive democracy, who are putting large sums of money on the opposition because the opposition promised them to sell their passports and sell the citizenship. And I will tell you, that will never happen so long as I am alive in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Never. And those foreign entities, well, they better don't set foot in St. Vincent. Because I'm telling you, the spirit of Chateaubriand will not allow it.
Mr. Brown, Antigua has been a destination place for a lot of folks. Given what Prime circumstances stated, you have an opinion on this?
Let me start by saying Ralph and I are enduring friends. So I don't know if this question is to promote any form of commerce, but there are no differences and we still remain friends. But let me start by commending Ralph for this very important publication on regional integration within our Caribbean space. Ralph has emerged now as one of the most prolific authors within the Caribbean, and he has gone the extra mile of documenting our history, which is not only a form of artistry, but obviously bridging the present and future generation. And I'm pretty sure that this particular publication will serve not only current but future leaders as we seek to strengthen our integration movement. So commendations to them, my dear comrade and friend. On the issue of investment immigration, most countries, especially developed countries, North America and Europe, they have investment immigration programs. Most of them, admittedly, they incentivize investments with residency that leads to citizenship. In the case of the 5 Caribbean countries that practice these immigration investment programs, we've had to go the extra mile to go towards citizenship. And I tell you why. In the case of Antigua and Barbuda, we have had an investment immigration program that gives residency for the last 30 years. And to date, we have not had 5 individuals who have shown interest in that residency program. So in order to be competitive, we have had to accelerate citizenship using all of the necessary processes, all the due diligence and so on. And it has emerged as one of the most significant non-tax revenue sources for these countries within the OECS. In fact, I'll say this, that the contribution of the investment immigration programs within the OECS is such that they represent a significant contributor to the reserves of the central bank, which incidentally also benefits St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So, to each his own. I respect the distinguished Prime Minister of St. Vincent's position, but similarly, we expect him to respect our position. So these programs have been very important. In some countries within the OECS, they contribute up to 40-50% of the revenue base. And if they were to lose that revenue, evidently, it will impact significantly on the OECS sub-region, even on the reserves of the central bank that we all share. So again, within the integration space, even within the OECS integration space, we'll always have our differences, but we all remain committed to the integration movement, recognizing that we are too small to survive within this hostile global marketplace. And even within the OECS sub-region, our countries are extremely small. We are actually micro-states. We're talking about populations of, on average, about 100, 110,000 individuals. In the case of St. Lucia, about 160. So we have to continue to strengthen our integration movement, not only within the OECS, but within the broader CARICOM, recognizing that our survivability is based on the functional cooperation that we currently enjoy. And I certainly support the suggestion by here that there should be a political committee. And perhaps, too, that there ought to be discussions among political parties so that we can move towards a tight integration movement. In fact, I'm an eternal optimist when it comes to integration, and I'm of the view too that we should strive towards achieving some form of political integration. I mean, the most powerful nation on earth is an integration of states, the United States. And as small countries with limited resources, I think that there are compelling reasons why we should integrate. Obviously, it will take time. Already we have an economic union, we're working together, we're benefiting, we have foreign policy coordination. We spoke about the situation with Guaido, in which we're able to resist the excesses of the United States, in which they're trying to install him as the president of Venezuela. I recall too, leading up to the Summit of the Americas, that many of us, myself and others, took the position that if Guaido was to attend that summit, that we will not participate. And that is why the United States actually withdrew from the conference. We are seeing where the integration movement is benefited in terms of interventions, resolve tensions between Venezuela and Ghana. So at the end of the day, it's working in terms of functional cooperation, foreign policy coordination. It's really serving as a form of social cohesion between members of the integration movement. And despite the gaps that exist, I believe that integration movement is work in progress, and that ultimately, we will get to the stage whereby we will have a stronger unit, and maybe to the stage where we get to political union that will serve the best interests of the region. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much. Of course, these are my senior colleagues and the last Prime Minister to be elected. And so to cast them in the seat. They respect the hierarchy.
And you had a good sense of marriage with that woman.
With respect to the Citizenship by Investment program that you asked about, and of course, St. Vincent's position is different to St. Vincent and the Grenadines' position. We share a similar position from Antigua and Barbuda, that this type really started in St. Vincent. before the mid-1980s. So we have had the longest program running. But from a practical standpoint, it is to say what impact this would have had on St. Kitts and Nevis. If you were to come to St. Kitts and Nevis, you would recognize that there's some level of advancement or development. And most of the funding for this came from the Citizenship by Investment program. It helped us in healthcare, our basic infrastructure, education, our ports. Wherever you see development, it has helped tremendously. So it has been a tool really to help us to develop. And therefore, it is vital for us at this particular time. We don't think it's compromising us in any way in terms of our sovereignty and what we represent as a people. We see it as part of leveraging St. Kitts and Nevis, attracting investment so that that can help our development, just like any other country. And of note, every country has some sort of citizenship by investment or residency by investment. We may call it something else. And so I know that is a tool that is used in a diversified form to help countries to develop. But I would also like to, of course, take this opportunity to really congratulate my senior comrade and another book. I can't keep up with the books. This is the second book that I'm Prime Minister just for about 3 years. So I guess one book every 1.5 years, so I look for the next one in 2027, 28, 2028. But it shows the depth of this man and what he has to share. And I'm happy that he is writing. And the reason why I say that, for example, we just lost one of our Governor Generals, Sir Edmund. Sir Edmund was a genius, a financial genius. He was the one who pioneered indigenous banks through the region to the point where our indigenous bank, although we were the smallest among the countries, was the largest indigenous bank in the whole region, along with our social security, one of the most well-funded ones across the region. It was because of him bringing that type of model to the region. And one of the things I said to his wife when I visited him recently, where are Edmund's book? I don't think Edmund has written books. I said, did anybody sit with Edmund and even allow him to speak orally and tape him? And I felt a sense of sadness. And I said, can you imagine this financial genius who established the largest indigenous bank on the smallest independent country in 40 years and set up a social security that is so robust today, has gone without this knowledge being recorded. And so when I see Comrade Ralph, my senior, writing, I welcome his writing. I'll say 2 more things and then wrap it up. I was speaking to Comrade Ralph recently. He was giving me some history about his travel years as a socialist in the region and how he was blocked by certain governments not to enter and how he was treated by others. He gave me that history. He has no bitterness. He says it was fine. And what I've come to recognize is that as a region, we have come extremely far. He was a Caribbean intellectual, socialist in his orientation, his political orientation, blocked by countries at one point, and today he's a senior statesman in the same region. That is tremendous.
Terence, my old man used to tell me, Ralph after one time is the next. So some which block me, give me red carpet now.
Ralph, I was gonna say blocked by one and deported by the other.
Yeah. And just the last point of the integration part of it, just the practical aspect of it is very important. And I
cause to deport him.
And the last thing I'll say on this point is just the practicality of the integration. For example, in 2023, we were facing a dengue issue, and we did not have enough foggers because it was not predicted that dengue would be a problem at the time. And the PS called me, and the CMO called me and said, Prime Minister, dengue cases are shooting up, Carnival might have to shut down and all these type of things that are telling me if we can't get control. I said, we are the foggers. We are out of foggers, we haven't bought foggers because we didn't think it. Climate change, of course. I pick up the phone and I call Gaston. I said, Prime Minister, I have a problem. I need your help. He said, I need fathers immediately to handle the situation. He said, how many you need? They will be on my plane by tomorrow. By the very next day, I got fathers from this Prime Minister that I was able to share immediately the news. And nobody knew that we were facing a real threat, economic threat, because Christmas and Carnival is a big time for St. Kitts and Nevis. I say that because I'm sure when I called him and heard the Prime Minister call from a neighboring island, the brotherly connection and the fact that we know we are in this boat together, he must have said, I have to do what I have to do to help St. Kitts and Nevis. He didn't say that to me, but I know that was what he sent in his hand, because this is what this integration movement is about. And then the last issue, speaking to our Caribbean, there are territories in the Caribbean. And they heard of a strategy that we applied in St. Kitts and Nevis that brought murder rate down maybe 80-90%. It has been successful. And they wanted to know what we were doing in St. Kitts and Nevis. They recognized that going to Britain was not solving their problems, because their local problems resemble nothing like Britain, but their local problems resemble St. Kitts and Nevis. So even though they're territories of Britain, they are really more akin to us, and now seeking to associate more with their Caribbean to help to solve their local problems. And welcome the governor of Anguilla, who's appointed by the British to St. Kitts and Nevis. I think that might have been the first time in our history since independence and the breakaway of Anguilla after we had arms at the First War in the Caribbean. That is a fact. The governor came, the premier came, the leader of the opposition came. So it's a big thing that the Anguillan government came to St. Kitts and Nevis. When I saw that and they were sitting with me discussing this whole thing about national security, what dawned on me is that in 1967, there was almost a war between Anguilla and St. Kitts and Nevis. Serious war. And now, these years later, the whole Anguillan government is sitting in the cabinet meeting of St. Kitts and Nevis federal government seeking to collaborate. And what it said to me is that the integration movement has worked and it will continue to work, because we have recognized that only us can save ourselves. Thank you.
Terrence, not only the integration movement worked, what David wrote in the Psalms came true. The stone that the builder rejected, Anguilla rejected you, has become the head cornerstone.
Terrence talked about Ralph's book. I think this is book number, publication number 14 or 15. One of the things that impressed me about Prime Minister Gonsalves is his energy, and I was really surprised. In 1980, former Prime Minister Tom Adams banned or barred then Professor Gonsalves from returning to the University of the West Indies. A group of us arranged for him to come to New York, and he came to Queen's College. Ralph stayed in my house. I was practicing martial arts, I was running. I went to bed, got up, and Ralph was sitting there reading a book. I said, what time do you wake up? I ain't going to sleep yet. You know, and that really struck me, because I thought I was a kid. But Ralph just, and it still happens. But this brings me to another question here. A few years ago, Prime Minister Gonsalves penned a piece entitled The Idea of Barbados, in which he listed the ways in which Barbados was special. As a youngster, I recall my friends, we looked forward to visiting Barbados, that special place. Tours were arranged, exchanges between my school, the Boys Grammar School, and Combermere College. Ralph, you might remember 1963, Combermere College brought a cricket team to St. Vincent to play against the Boys Grammar School cricket team. We were always impressed with Barbados, high scores in GCE. You name it. Which means a small country that punches above its weight. Without putting in the spot, Prime Minister Marty, the easternmost country in the Caribbean, now member of the OECS. Is that something on your agenda?
We have in the past had cause to explore it. Prime Minister Arthur, before myself, started the process. When we first came in, we started to look and see how we could work close together. And we will continue to do so. One of the practical difficulties is, I suppose, with respect to the economic union and the love that Barbadians have for the flexibility that they have with respect to their own fixed exchange rate and indeed their own central bank. If we came into the OECS, we would have to be a member of the monetary union, which has other adjustments that we would have to get accustomed to. What we've tried to do is to treat the OECS in a deeper way than we treat the most, because of the functional proximity and the functional union effectively. There are a lot of persons from the Eastern Caribbean who live in Barbados. There are a lot of Bajans who go to the OECS. The OECS is the only region in the world with whom we have a trade surplus. And as a result, not just in goods, but in services as well. So that without us having to put a ring on it, we have effectively lived as one. And we have allowed that closeness to guide us in every respect. Terence spoke about the assistance from Gaston and the assistance he rendered to Anguilla. I know what it is when we first got vaccines in COVID, and Prime Minister Modi delivered 100,000 vaccines to us. And we took a conscious decision that Barbados could not live by itself in this neighborhood. And we gave away half of the vaccines in spite of the fact that there were more people in Barbados that would need it. That sense of fraternity is one that continues to engulf us. And therefore, I would like to see a political union like Gaston in the entire Caribbean. But I do understand the practical steps that we must take to get there. And even though it is complex, I think that the wider region will soon have no choice. And if you are a student of history and you see how different phases of history take place, as I said, I am truly worried that the rest of the world needs to step up, including us, to defend the rules-based order. If not, it is going to be practically impossible for small states to survive. And that includes unions like the OECS and CARICOM. And I say so deliberately. So, short answer, it is not on our immediate horizon to put a ring on it, but it is our continued commitment to work closer with the OECS and the rest of the Southern Caribbean in as close a way as we can for the benefit of our citizens. Our citizens don't see the difference as part of their lived reality. And if you understand that when Soufriere erupted, Barbados on that Saturday after became dark at 11 o'clock in the morning. My airport closed for 9 days, and my seaport closed for 7 days. But more importantly, when Beryl hit last year, you couldn't get the vegetables and the plantains and the various things that you were accustomed to getting, because we take it for granted, because the schooners come up every week and offload, and the vendors literally feed agents in a large respect from the farmers of St. Vincent and to a lesser extent the farmers in the rest of the OECS. Gaston will tell you that the ability to move people in the region, both in terms of the air bridges and the sea bridges, is absolutely essential. And while we have had, because of fiscal circumstances, not to be able to continue in LIAT or whatever, I have said to Gaston that let us talk and see how best we can continue now to reinforce. Because as we begin to turn the corner, wherever we can find common purpose, we must find common purpose as a region. That's fundamentally what the integration movement is about. We have a big day coming up with 2 members of the OECS and Belize and Barbados with respect to full freedom of movement. And for those who get nervous and want to create mischief, freedom of movement is always subject to 2 things: public health and national security. And that needs to be said because others don't appreciate that sometimes. But I find it curious because the truth is that with the exception of Haiti, all of us are underpopulated. And the truth is that that is why the movement will work. Rather than worrying about who is going to move among ourselves, we also will need to be asking, how can we supplement? We've had to bring in nurses from Ghana. There are not enough nurses in CARICOM to help Barbados offset the deficit. And I'm sure that there are other things that in the region that others will need to have to be offset. So, not yet, but we will continue to live very closely together or live with.
Thank you. Before we invite the members of the audience to ask a question, Prime Minister Motley, your response prompts a question to you, Prime Minister themselves. When Prime Minister Motley talked about the central bank, there is a passage in the book, Dr. Gonsalves, where you speak to the challenges of moving to the single market economy. How do you see that unfold, especially where you later on talk about economies being unequally yoked?
Well, one of the problems always in integration movements with separate central banks is how the payment systems are going to operate as you trade. There's a difficulty between ourselves and Trinidad and Tobago because we will sell $8 billion a year to Trinidad and Tobago in agricultural products, $10 million. But we will buy $75 million US in goods, largely petrochemicals, energy products. We will pay them in hard dollars, US dollars. And I can't get the farmers of St. Vincent and the Grenadines can't get $8 million a year from Trinidad in US currency because they have a system where they ration the currency. I don't understand it. You can have currency for camembert cheese. You can have currency to pay Vibes Cartel a deposit of nearly $1 million. But you can't pay for my yam and my dashkin and my tanya, my edos, my sweet potatoes, and my plantain. No. And I pay you up front, and you telling the farm, the persons who trade, take the $50. Well, as I said, what attracted a comment from me and people went, well, it went viral, I've been told. I said, when you give the farmers $50 in Trinidad and tell them bring it in, they may as well give them monopoly money. Because nobody taking the money in St. Vincent with $50. So those are some of the issues. But the central banks, we're trying to work these problems out. And that's a challenge. We don't have that challenge with Barbados in that way. Barbados has its own regime of currency controls, but when we trade with Barbados, we get our payments. I don't mind you give me EC dollars because my $2.70 EC equals $1 that has been fixed for 30 something years. So that's fine with me. So that's a problem. But let me hasten to add the CSME, Caribbean Single Market and Economy. We have made a lot of progress on the market side, and we haven't made as much progress on the single economy side. And part of the progress on the single economy side involves clearly freedom of movement of people. And we have the regime set out in the revised treaty of Chatham, and we have made progress. And there are 4 countries going to free movement in the community, in the Caribbean community. 2 of them already have free movement among themselves, but Dominica and St. Vincent and Grenadines, because in the OECS, they have complete freedom of movement already. You don't need any work permit from Antigua to come to St. Vincent, or from St. Vincent to go to Antigua to St. Kitts, and so on and so forth. Well, that's what's going to happen from August the 1st with ourselves and Barbados, and also from 1st of October. And Belize. The one in Belize is going to be important because there's a large community of Garifuna in Belize, and they see Yoreni, the original name of St. Vincent and Grenadines. We are their spiritual home because that's where the Garifuna came from. We're not going to have a lot of movement other than that. What's really going to be important is the movement between Barbados and St. Vincent and Grenadines. And I think we're going to see some, and of course Dominica, but because it's more expensive to get to Dominica from Barbados, it's fairly easy. And I think we're going to see some increased activity as a consequence of that. And that will give an impetus, I believe, for others to come along. I'm actually on the order paper for Parliament here on the 29th. There's some stuff dealing with this freedom of movement, so that, but even if all the legislative work is not in place, we'll just give the administrative directions so that we'll just proceed with that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gonzalez. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you're chomping at the bit to get your words in and ask questions of our esteemed panelists, Prime Minister Drew and Brown, along with Prime Minister.
May I have to go with another appointment?
The hardest working woman in politics.
I have things to say that are peculiar to a woman.
You going to fix your hair?
All right, before Prime Ministers Brown and Drew leave, questions for the panelists, anyone?
There's one here.
Yes.
Good evening, I'm Melanie Chen. I'm on the board of the United Council, where I founded the Caribbean Initiative. I'm the chair of the Caribbean energy, so I fully endorse regional integration in our region. And what we've seen, what I've seen just for both roles, is that the developed and even the developing countries, there's a lot of coordination among the different facets of policy making. So one of the questions that was, I think, issues that was addressed earlier was the information sharing, right? And I think President Ali was talking more about maybe the intelligence, more about it, getting access to that to make better decisions. Has the region and the leadership considered something like, and I don't want to help to the Homeland Security Advisory Council, because that, what the US does is they bring together the public, private policy makers to try and, gather information, to analyze it, to therefore then implement better policy. And especially in an age here where things are moving very quickly, we need a more sort of adept mechanism to kind of help the leadership here make better decisions.
Well, I tell you on the question of information from a security standpoint, we have a CARICOM implementation agency for crime and security, and there's information sharing. Then we have the regional security system, which involves the OECS countries, Barbados, and Guyana. And as part of the CARICOM implementation, crime and security impacts, there is an intelligence fusion center, which is based in Barbados, where we work with our other allies extra-regionally, where we can have a lot of information. And if you're coming to St. Vincent, for instance, we don't have any requirement in St. Vincent, the youth St. Vincent and Grenadines, for you to fill out any form, immigration form. Because within 20 minutes of you leaving wherever you're leaving, we have information on every single passenger who's on that plane. Not just the name, but we will know if there are any bad guys or gals on that. Those things help us. But we need to do far more than we have been doing. I'm telling you what we have done, but we need to do far more. And there are information gaps. As you would have heard, both President Ali and Prime Minister Montley spoke to this. It's about we owning our own data. And it is a problem. And that is something which we need to work on more assiduously together. You know, this may surprise you. There was a provider of passports services prior to when I came to office. And when I wanted to deal with the information in a particular way, they said it's their information. Because the information had been signed away. Of course, I changed the provider and had a different arrangement. I would be surprised that there are countries in the region who don't know quite what information they own and what they do not own. So you raise a very important question. And the answer is that we need to do more than we have been doing.
All right. First of all, thank you so much. Your Excellencies, and thank you so much for having me here. My name is Nestor Junior Dorsis. I am originally from Haiti, but currently I live in Canada where I reside. My organization provides training, interactive and introspective on unity, collaboration, organizational effectiveness, especially among youth spaces. So this conversation on integration is really right up my alley and my passion as well. So with your reflection and experiences and to give advice to the youth in the region when it's come to integration, what do you think are some of the most important principles they have to pay attention to keep that within the region, especially for youth leaders and
When I interface with young people, if I meet somebody, a young person who is 25 years old, I ask the simple question to them: what do you want to do or be in the year 2050? What do you want to do or be when you're 50 years old? And what you want to do or be in 2050, if you're 25 now, is going to depend on what you do now. And centrally, that relates to your education and your training. Above, there are many other things, but that is vital. And so you asked me, and one of the issues clearly is one: how do we deal with information technology, how we deal with information systems, how we deal with AI? Is AI going to control us, or we control AI? Those are issues of real critical importance for young people in the Caribbean. Of course, other issues: sports, culture, entertainment, new areas of economic activity, and so on and so forth.
I must commend the Caribbean leaders on this venture. My name is Kim Morgan Smart. I work with this, no introduction to you. I have two questions. How can Caribbean leaders ensure citizens feel directly connected to the integration process rather than seeing it as a government-only agenda? And my second question, what concrete steps have been taken to strengthen political will among member states, especially when national interests clash with regional goals?
Now, the most important form of connection for people in Caribbean, in the ocean, relates to the matter of freedom of movement of people. Under the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, the goal is complete freedom of movement. And the process which we have had is that certain categories of workers can get what is called a CARICOM Skills National Certificate. And when you get that certificate, university graduates, sportsmen, media persons, teachers, nurses, agricultural workers, domestic workers, the categories have been expanded tremendously. The difficulty is that some countries, there's no uniformity.
Folks, can you keep it that way, please? Thank you.
There's no uniformity in the issuance of the certificates, even though there's a common piece of legislation, or the respect given by various countries as regarding the certificate. For instance, if Vincent Grenadier issues a certificate to a national, so that they go into Trinidad. Trinidad will tell them, but hey, you need to get a certificate in Trinidad also. But that's an absurdity. So there are some difficulties like that. But in the categories are widening, and more people are moving. The problem though is that as we have more and more people who are moving, We don't have the airlift with the kinds of arrangements that we had when the air was in the skies. So there's a problem there with interregional air transport. But in the OECS, there's complete freedom of movement. Gaston has gone, but I want to say that one of the countries in one of the countries within the OECS, which has entered a reservation in respect of freedom of movement for the wider Caribbean, is Antigua and Barbuda. And I understand why they have done it, because the truth is this: more than half of the people, or half of the people in Antigua, are not Antiguan born. They come from other Caribbean countries. They have been very, very generous. So we are seeing more and more of it. I don't think, though, that a lot of Caribbean persons have caught on to that particular reality. And young people and others are moving far more frequently than before. Look, the problem you have raised about when particular national interests collide with regional interests, this is a problem you have in all integration movements. You have it in Europe, you have it in West Africa, and Europe is the most advanced one. These are problems that you just have to work through on an ongoing basis. But I tell you this, I have found over the near 25 years that I've been Prime Minister, that there's a greater eagerness for governments and peoples to want to do more things together as a region rather than separated. I think life's experiences have brought that.
Before we wrap up, I'd like to recognize the presence of two individuals who have played sterling roles in the integration movement. Carlo Barnett, the Secretary General of CARICOM, and my old comrade from the Grenada Revolution days, served as, if I recall, Chief Education Officer in the Ministry of Education, Dr. Leviticus Jews, Executive Director of MCS, Director General of MCS. This is one of the ways to do where you are. All right. Any other questions for Dr. Gonzalez? As I said earlier, one of his problems is one of his strengths. He go all night to be early.
Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon, sir.
No, let me just say Antigua. I noticed telling me look at me because you told me just tell you I have another engagement. Anyway, let's go.
Quick question. The Caribbean and SIDS have what I feel is the answer to the world's problems with regard to oceans and the biodiversity that's there. How can they use that to their strength along the lines of the Bridgetown Initiative, which says that if, to lower the borrowing rate for countries that sit in climate-based risk areas? How can you use that to offset any monies owed? How can you use your knowledge to have other countries pay for it? I know that sounds simplistic. I don't know if it makes sense.
There are, yes. There are several dimensions of the question with oceans. One of them has to do with how do we manage the seascape in the normal way in the law of the sea, international law of the sea. And the second one is how do we address the next frontier, not outer space, but the deep sea bed. The resources in the deep sea bed. Already you're noticing that there's a privatization of space, and there's a quest by developed countries like the United States to have a privatization of the deep sea bed. We have a lot of minerals, places which we haven't gone yet. There's the International Seabed Authority, which is located in Jamaica, and we have not been making enough use of it. So that's the issue of oceans in those two dimensions. I want to say this. Archipelagic states or island states like St. Vincent and the Grenadines, though we have a landmass of 150 square miles, do you know that when we put our 200 miles exclusive economic zone, we can't get it on the eastern side because we have to do midpoint. We do midpoint with Barbados, we do midpoint with St. Lucia and Grenada. But we have a large seascape on the western side. When you put what we have control over, our seascape, in addition to our landscape, we are bigger than Rwanda. And you look at our seascape and our landscape, and you see the size which we have compared to, say, Switzerland. Small states nevertheless, but still our size is large. The issue which you raise otherwise than those which I just talked about seabed is the question, what are the instruments we use in relation to carbon credits, the market for carbon credits, and that's an area which more and more we are exploring. And that's one particular area where there are possibilities. In the case of Guyana is a very interesting situation. Guyana is a country which is rapidly advancing in petrochemicals and hydrocarbons, but yet it is a country which is very strong in biodiversity because of the size of its forests. And the arrangements that worked out globally is that it gets a lot of credits and investments as a consequence of the maintenance of its forest space. Incidentally, between Africa and the Caribbean, Latin America, we have the two biggest forests, the longest, the one in the Congo and the one in the Amazon. And there are several countries which they're two CARICOM countries which have the Amazon linked to it. Of course, Guyana is one of them, the big one. Of course, the other countries in Latin America. A comment on the Bridgestone Initiative 3.0. It's a brilliant exposition and articulation by Ian, and CARICOM has accepted it. Bridgestone 3.0, as to how we have a just climate financing arrangement in addition to innovative areas of addressing financial development generally. The problem is this, and this would require another long discussion. We could have one on these. Developed countries and institutions, including the World Bank and the IMF, they're genuflecting to Bridgestone 3.0 in the way, as a Roman Catholic, I go inside of the church and I make the sign of the cross in front of Mother Mary and Jesus. But it doesn't register in the heart. And they're seeking to rob Bridgestone 3.0 of its progressive content. And that is a struggle which we're going on, we're carrying it on, and they're trying to knock the shine off of Mia's ball by robbing it of its progressive content. But that is a struggle. That's a conversation for another time.
We'd like to thank our panelists, and particularly Dr. the Honorable Ralph Gonzalez, Prime Minister, Simplicity of Grenadines, for his eloquence, his stamina, his sticking to us here with everyone. And every time his wife roll her eyes again, he pretends not seeing her. But on the publication of his 14th book, the book is actually 15. In any event, the fact that he has the time to write and encourages others to write while running a country is of great, import and something to admire. We'd like to thank our panelists, my colleague, Lance Gould, for his probing questions on the issue of curriculum integration. Encourage you all to read the book and to have some final remarks by Ambassador King. Rhonda, Ambassador King, who will bring this to closure. And again, we thank you very much. And I will hand out you good night before I do that.
And before Rhonda speaks, let me just want to thank you for coming out. And to say, if you're following the UN tomorrow morning, it should be an interesting session. I'm speaking number 6 tomorrow. Israel is speaking number 1. And before me, there will be, China will be speaking, I think 3 or 4. Pakistan is speaking. And immediately before I speak, the Prime Minister will be speaking. So tomorrow should be an interesting hour and a half, 2 hours. Like between 9 and 11, it should be interesting. And let's leave it at that.
Well, that's the last word. Thank you all so much for coming. We have gone around and distributed books. If you haven't received one, then you can collect one at the exit. And I think we don't have time to sign, which was the idea, but I think the conversation was better than just the signature. So thank you all for coming, and do grab the book. Godspeed, peace profound.
Wait a minute. And good job. I didn't mess up, right? No. How do I even do that? How do I do that? All the
Yes.
When the game gets rough and this life just seems so tough, make we talk, my people, make we talk. When this town becomes an ugly place, don't let it erase the smile from your face. Make we talk, people, make we talk. Conversation is the key, a guiding light for you and me. Spark a talk and you will see conflict solver A to Z. World leaders master the art of self-defense just by talk. So people, make we talk. Hey, we're living in a world that on ourselves we must depend. Make we talk.